Fractions, decimals, and percents are simply different ways to write numbers that could have the same value. For example, 1/4 has the same value as the decimal 0.25. To get 0.25 when we start with 1/4, all we have to do is take 1 and divide it by 4. The percent, 25%, has the same value as well. If we have the decimal 0.25, we can move the decimal point 2 places to the right to change that to 25%. If we start with a percent, like 137%, we can easily write that as an equivalent decimal by moving the decimal point 2 places to the left. And 1.37 is equivalent to 137 over 100. Now to get that fraction, we can look at 137% and remember that percent means out of 100. So 137% is 137 out of 100, which is 137 over 100. And that can even be written as a mixed number, 1 and 37/100ths. If we start with a decimal, we can change that to a percent by moving the decimal point 2 places to the right. And we can write that as a fraction by remembering that percent means out of 100. So 0.9% means 0.9 out of 100. Now that's not quite a fraction yet because we need to make sure that both the numerator and denominator of the fraction are integers, and the numerator is a decimal number. It's an easy fix though. We'll just multiply numerator and denominator by 10 to get the fraction 9 over 1,000. Converting between fractions, decimals, and percents is a little trickier when we start out with a percent that also contains a fraction. Now this is considered a percent because it has a percent sign. And if we'd like to change this to a fraction, the first thing we're going to do is just work with that mixed number, 3 2/3, and write that as 11/3. It's still a percent though. But if we remember that percent means out of 100, then that's equivalent to 11/3 divided by 100, or 11/3 times 1/100th, which gives us the fraction 11/300ths. Now if we would like to have a decimal out of that, we would have to take 11 and divide it by 300. And since that's a repeating decimal, we can write that using our bar notation. So we have 3.6 with the repeating 6. Finding the percent of a number can be very useful when working with percent problems. For example, we might be asked, what is 22% of 40? Well, there's two ways to approach this. The first way is by writing an equation that represents the same thing as the words. So what is 22% of 40 is the same as x equals 0.22 times 40. And then all we have to do is multiply on the right side, and we get x equals 8.8. So 8.8 is 22% of 40. The other way we can solve this is by using proportions. On the left side, you see 22 over 100. That's because we know we have 22%, and percent means out of 100. We would like to know what part of 40 that is. The what part of 40 gives us the fraction on the right side, x over 40. And once we have a proportion, we can cross multiply and solve in order to find the value for x. And once again, we get 8.8. So 8.8 is 22% of 40. When we're finding sales tax, we're actually finding percent of a number. Sales tax is the tax rate times the purchase price. For example, if we'd like to know what the total cost of a $35 book is, if the tax rate is 7.25%, We'll find the sales tax first by taking the tax rate times the purchase price. That does give us a decimal number that goes beyond the hundredths place. And since this is money, we're going to round to the nearest hundredth. So we're going to call the sales tax $2.54. The total cost is the purchase price plus the sales tax. So we end up with a total cost of $37.54. Commission is also percent of a number. In this case, commission is the commission rate expressed as a decimal times the purchase price. So if we'd like to find the commission that's earned on a $900 sofa if the commission rate is 13%, we'll have to multiply the commission rate expressed as a decimal, so 0.13, times the purchase price, and we get a commission of $117. For percent of change, we need to know two things. We need to know how much change happened between the two values and what the original value was. For example, if we know that the price of a phone dropped from $700 to $550, and we'd like to find the percent of decrease in price, the first step will be to find how much the price changed. In this case, it changed by $150. And then we'll have to take that $150 of change and divide it by the original amount, which in this case was the $700. Now in this case we get a decimal number that we're going to have to round according to the directions. So we're rounding to the nearest tenth as a percent, so this would be 21.4%. Simple interest is also percent of a number, but it's a little more than that, because simple interest is a percent of principal over time, where time is expressed in years. That's where we get this formula from. Interest equals principal times rate times time. Rate has to be written as a decimal, and time has to be expressed in years. So we'd like to know how much interest is earned after 3 years if we invest $250 and the interest rate is 2%. The interest then is principal, $250, times the rate, 0.02, times the time in years, which is 3, which gives us $15 in interest. Now it's important to notice that sometimes the time you're given in a problem is not in years. We've changed one thing in this problem. How much interest is earned in 3 months on a $250 investment if the interest rate is 2%? In this case, we have interest equals $250 in principal times an interest rate of 0.02 times a time of 3/12. That's because the 3 is not 3 years, it's 3 months. So 3 months is 3/12 of a year, which gives us interest of $1.25.